Welcome to Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmedeke, and it is Monday morning, so we're getting together to react to the Broncos' 26-20 loss to the Seattle Seahawks in Bo Nix's debut. So I am joined, of course, by Chris Thomason, live from Seattle. Chris, how are you?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me, Chris.
And we've also got Kyle Fredrickson back again. He's going to be joining us on these Mondays to break it all down. And as he put it to me off air, I can't believe how boring this was.
Yes, I want to just apologize to Broncos fans. That was not a fun introduction to the Bo Nix era. Maybe a little expected when we reflect on it, but it was not fun. That's not the word I'd use.
All right, so before we dive more into the game, Sean Payton just got done speaking to the media on his weekly conference call. You guys both listened in. Chris, any new injury front? Anything? I guess Garrett Bowles would be the big one.
Yeah, he said Garrett Bowles just has a contusion. X-rays were negative. That was pretty much what he said after the game yesterday. So I imagine he'll be good to go Sunday against Pittsburgh. But a lot of what he said was the same after the game yesterday. He said they have to do a better job around Bo Nix, and he said we just simply have to run the ball better. I mean, he pointed the finger squarely at his running backs. And, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I asked Sean Payton on the conference call if he is treating Bo Nix maybe differently being a rookie after a difficult game than, say, he would with a veteran quarterback. He didn't necessarily 100% answer the question, but did touch upon Nix's maturity. But it's quite obvious that Payton is treating Nix with kid gloves here. I mean, he's not going to be critical of him. He doesn't want to hamper his confidence moving forward or anything along those lines.
So, Kyle, what do you think of that strategy? Do you think that's a good call?
Yeah, I think a lot of the reaction after Sean Payton's post-game comments were, oh, wow, it wasn't Nick's fault. Everyone else has got to step up, echoing what Chris said. But can you imagine him coming out after game one and being like, man, the quarterback was terrible. Like, yeah, Nix has to be better. I just don't think there's a universe that exists where that's his reaction, no matter how well Nix played. To me, I think the unspoken thing in sort of analyzing his performance and how the Broncos played was that the plan for him was very limited. I mean, the number of times that Nix threw downfield, I could put up one hand and I think it's less than 5. And on most of those attempts, they were either intercepted or almost intercepted. So the amount of those short yardage throws, to me, showed that this was a baseline game for Nix, get him as comfortable as humanly possible, almost to the point where, they want to win this game, but they just want to see what they have. They want to see how he reacts to certain situations. And now going into week 2, it wasn't pretty, but now Sean Payton kind of has like I mentioned, a baseline to see what this offense can do. I'd like to see it get more creative because, man, that was just a boring offensive game plan to watch.
Well, yeah, and that's my next question for you, Chris, is, Sean Payton did talk about his game plan may need to change and needs to be a little different. What is it? Because he threw 42 times, and, they were never really down by 2 scores until late in the fourth quarter.
Well, I mean, he said it today about the running attack. They need to have a better running attack. I mean, Javonte Williams, much was made about him losing 11 pounds and all that. And he had a nice 9-yard run to start the game, but that was that. He disappeared afterward. Audric Estime has a 12-yard run and then goes into the doghouse after he fumbles. So maybe you try to give Estime more carries and hope like heck he doesn't fumble. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin is still going to get some work, but he's a kind of a change of pace guy. And it's like we talked about last year when he's in the game, because he's not a great pass protector. It kind of telegraphs the run. Who knows? Maybe they dust off Blake Watson or something, but that was his major message today. They need to improve the running game. And obviously he said they're going to be facing a better defense this week in Pittsburgh. I mean, it's going to be a slog of a game. I mean, Pittsburgh didn't score a touchdown yesterday against Atlanta. So, they're going to have to mount some sort of a running attack indeed to keep the pressure off Bo Nix.
Before we dive more into Nix, Kyle, what is Javonte Williams' role on this team now? He had 8 carries, and Jaleel McLaughlin gets more than him. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't know, and that was a curious piece to me because I remember doing the season preview and thinking, hey, this is a guy who could be the bell cow back, who could really get the majority of carries. And I don't know. I think it goes back to Sean Payton saying one thing and doing another. Like, yeah, they've got to run the ball better, but they need to run the ball more to get it established, right? Like, you can't really have one without the other. If you're not committed to the run, you're not going to run the ball well. So I think as the season goes on, it makes the most sense for Javonte to be that lead back. But we'll see. Clearly, they love Jaleel McLaughlin. I think of every player on the roster, he probably was the most consistent in making like an explosive play out of the backfield, a little bit of burst. I think he might have caught, 4 or 5 passes for like net 0 yards or something like that.
5 for 1.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So they're not attacking the field down the field, but that shows you that they want him to have the ball in open space, right?
Yeah.
And that's something to watch as we go on, is to really kind of see what that running back receiver game looks like. You know that Sean Payton wants to use it. I'd like to see them use the tight end more as well, right? All this talk about Greg Dulcich, like, to me, that seems like a perfect safety valve for Bo when things aren't going well, to find your big tight end in the middle of the field, or just kind of let him have a jump ball and show off that athleticism. We didn't see that at all, and I'm curious if that grows as the year goes on.
And so let's go back to Knicks a little bit. And Chris, I wanted to ask you, because there was a lot of, you heard the guys talking, he had command of the huddle. Sean Payton said he was calm and comfortable. Was that Sean Payton's quote after the game? Did he seem that way to you? Because he didn't seem that way to me at times.
Well, I obviously wasn't in the huddle with him, but I did ask him after the game how much the crowd was a factor with the 12s. He kind of mostly shrugged it off and said, well, there was one situation, down near the goal line where it was a factor. But clearly the atmosphere, I'm not going to say it rattled him, but it definitely affected him. I mean, there were times when it looked like the signals were hard to hear and that sort of thing. And I mean, we touched upon it. It was a very tough atmosphere for him to go to in his first game in the NFL. But the troubling part for the Broncos was they had so many opportunities early in the game with the safeties, with the defense playing well, with a good field position, and they failed to remotely take advantage of them.
So Kyle, you wrote about the 2 safeties actually in today's Denver Gazette. And I want to ask you about that. But, with Knicks, how much did his teammates let him down? Humphrey had the drop. Josh Reynolds had the drop. I don't think Sutton had a drop, but there was a little bit, because the Humphrey one I remember early in the game was a 3rd and 4. He was open. Knicks put the ball right in his hands. He just dropped it. That could have been a momentum switch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that illustrates something that we're going to see all year long. The margin of error for this team is going to be like razor thin, right? And that's the problem. When you have a veteran team, a team that knows who it is, you can get over those mistakes. You can have a fumble or an interception or a drop pass, and it's not going to just kill your chances. With this Broncos team and how young they are, I mean, those plays are glaring, right? I mean, there's even the Audric Estime fumble that's recovered by a teammate early in that game. There are several just kind of, moments where Broncos fans are just kind of gasping like, oh, let's not give the ball away. This team can't do that. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, you point back to those safeties, in terms of the Broncos creating their own turnovers, the defense stepping up. I was impressed with that. But that was almost like Seattle just imploding themselves, right? Like I was less impressed with Seattle than I was with the Broncos, maybe in those situations. And then more impressed with the Seahawks, the way that they were able to really turn that corner. So adjustments are key, right? I was surprised that it's the first-year coach for Seattle. His team made the better adjustments than the Sean Payton coach team, the Super Bowl winner, the veteran. So quite the juxtaposition there.
So, and Kyle, with the 2 safeties, like the defense was flying around in the first half for sure. But then once they started giving the ball to Kenneth Walker, that was kind of over. And Seattle really figured out a way to neutralize them.
Yeah, and one word that Sean Payton kept using in his remarks was tempo. All of a sudden, they picked up the pace. They started grinding it out. And it's curious to me that the Broncos wouldn't maybe anticipate some of that happening, especially with the way that Geno Smith was struggling, I think, passing the ball at that point. So we'll see. Run defense was a huge problem for this team a year ago, right? And then in this game on Sunday, that they give up 5 yards per carry. So you add that to the red zone offense issues that they had as well. It just kind of felt like same old Broncos to some degree.
Yeah, it was the same old stuff this weekend. We talked about that off air, but the run defense is a hot topic again because Chris, all we heard was John Franklin, all these guys coming in, everything was going to be better on the run defense, and for a while it looked good, and then all of a sudden it just didn't, and they could never come up with a stop when they needed it.
Yeah, you mentioned John Franklin Myers. I mean, I still think he's going to be an excellent asset to the team, but it certainly wasn't a great debut. He didn't have any stats until maybe midway through the second half, and he only played about half the snaps yesterday. So yeah, the defensive line definitely has to step up. I mean, Alex Singleton mentioned it after the game. Other players did. In terms of the run game, they have to do a better job there. But I think in the second half they got a little worn down, and basically also Seattle's got Kenneth Walker, who's better than any running back that the Broncos have.
And with the defense, and I want to ask both of you about this. The Baron Browning offsides was just a killer on that last drop. Like, is there still a little bit of and Kyle, go first? Are they still a little undisciplined?
I think so. I think there were a few plays throughout that game where you could, levy that against this team. I don't think that they played overall just terribly sloppy. I do think for what it's worth, Sean Payton might have said he didn't want to throw that many times, but that was the game plan they wanted to run. They wanted to get those short passes, try to get Bo Nix comfortable. And they did that to some degree. So I think they accomplished some things without making major mistakes. But you're right. The Baron Browning offsides, I think about they get that ball off the muff punt, I believe, which was in the first or second quarter.
Yeah.
And I think there was an offsides that was actually called on Bo Nix to where he stepped back before the ball was even snapped. So yeah, you can point to a lot of those little plays. And I think that's a reflection of a young team. I don't know that Sean was asked specifically about that being a problem after week 1, but if we go into week 2 and more of those big penalties pop up, I think it's fair to question them on that. And that's just a team learning how to win, in my opinion, right? Like, I watched a team on Sunday that isn't quite sure how to win with this group, and they're going to have to figure that out pretty quick.
That's interesting. And I want to ask you about that, Chris. Like, the learning to win thing is a big deal. And the young team, these are Sean Payton's guys. I think patience probably has to be preached a little bit here.
Yeah, true. On one token, and I wrote about it last week, I mean, they're emphasizing so much getting off to a fast start and avoiding the 1-5 type start they had last year. But then again, last year, I mean, I know Payton was in his first year versus now in his second. They had a more veteran outfit and had home games, their first 2, still got off to a bad start. This year, they have a younger team, 3 of their first 4 on the road. The schedule's tougher, and it's going to be real tough to get off to a, quote, fast start. I mean, they've got to try to avoid starting out 1-3 with Pittsburgh at home coming up, at Tampa Bay, at the Jets. But I think it's going to be tough for them to avoid a 1-3 type start.
Well, they're going to have to do they'll do it with defense, right? Just to jump in there, just something I'm thinking about. Like, how do they survive this stretch? It's going to have to be defensive led. I mean, and when I watched that game on Sunday, the first 2 plays, sack, interception. So I think we'll see, that they're capable of kind of, creating turnovers, and they've got big playability. To me, as we look at if they're going to survive that and get, 1 or 2 wins out of these first 4 games, it's got to be the defense first, because I just don't think we've seen enough from Nix. I know it's 1 game to think that, he's going to be that gunslinger mentality and do this thing by himself. He's going to need a lot of help.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the playmaker question too. I had kind of for both of you, like, nobody. I mean, Seattle's a good tackling team. You can tell that their new coach has installed some of that Baltimore Raven attitude with them. But Chris, they would catch and they were done. Like, I don't even know what their yards after the catch stat was, but it couldn't have been much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you look at the stats here. I mean, you touched upon McLaughlin, 5 catches, 1 yard. I mean, Devon Vele catches 8 balls and gets 39 yards. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. Have you ever seen anybody catch 8 passes and especially a wide receiver and have less than
Crazy.
40 yards receiving? I mean, yeah, I mean, it was just lots of dinks, and then when they got the dinks, they weren't breaking the tackles.
And Kyle, I mean, it seems like guys are not open. Also, like, I
Yeah,
watched that Rams-Lions game last night, and Cooper Kupp was open every single. I mean, that's a different receiver than the Broncos have, but it just seems like the Broncos aren't. Everything is hard. Everything is difficult for them to get anything yesterday.
yeah. And it's week 1 too, so who
Yeah.
knows where both these teams are in a few weeks. But you're right. There wasn't really room to breathe for receivers. It was a lot of tight windows. I mentioned it earlier, all the times that Bo Nix took deep shots, you were holding your breath because even before the ball got there, the TV announcers were saying, "Oh, there's 3 guys in coverage." So, that's never a good sign. I would like to see Marvin Mims be more involved, not to be a broken record from last season, but I spoke to him before the game on Friday, and he made the point, hey, everyone wants to be more involved as a receiver. Everyone wants more touches. And so at the same point, he's going to just do what he can to help this team win. And right now, it doesn't feel like he's going to factor into this offense unless, like Chris mentioned, they learn how to run the ball, they get a little bit of balance, and then they force teams to respect the run. And that's when maybe we finally see Bo Nix take a deep shot to where he hits a receiver and there's open field to run, right? I think what we saw in week 1 was a lot of zone coverage. Seattle was going to sit back and try to throw layers in front of Bo Nix and confuse him. And for the most part, it worked. And I think also when you run that defense, part of that is the yards after the catch might be minimized because every time a guy catches a ball, he's got 2 or 3 guys in his area. So kudos to McDonald. On the television broadcast, they spoke about how much man-to-man that he ran in Baltimore. And I think that threw off Sean Payton and Bo Nix a little bit in terms of what they saw on Sunday.
Well, the announcer thing is funny because when he threw both his picks, Archuleta went, "Oh no."
Yeah, the ball hadn't gotten there yet.
The ball hadn't even got there yet, and it was bad. And he looked like a rookie. I think we can all just agree on that. And
staring down receivers, right? And maybe we'll go to CT on that. Is that a big issue for rookie quarterbacks in general, right? I mean, to be able to look off a receiver against an NFL defense, it seems awful hard to do.
Yeah, well, it's a rookie, tough on the road in that atmosphere. And I mean, even veterans, I recall watching the Atlanta-Pittsburgh game yesterday. Kirk Cousins, he's at home, and they were talking about him looking off receivers and going to his third option, and he throws an interception. So, yeah, I think some of it goes back to what Chris said. The receivers aren't getting open, and you touched upon it, and it's mystifying this Marvin Mims thing. I mean, as I noted before, I mean, Sean Payton said in 3 different states this year, Florida at the owners meeting, Indiana at the combine, and in Colorado, lots of emphasis getting Marvin Mims involved. And you're thinking when they let Tim Patrick go, okay, Marvin Mims has moved up in the pecking order and he plays 12 snaps, gets 1 target, no catches.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda, but they could have used Tim Patrick yesterday. I think at times, Tim Patrick was one of those guys, and I remember I wrote this with a Friday Face-Off and security blanket. Nix needs a security blanket. Who is that on this team right now, Kyle? I don't know. Is it Vele apparently? I don't know. It seems like it.
It seems like Vele is a strong early target. I mentioned it before. It ought to be Greg Dulcich. I mean, we'll see. I mean, he flashed in preseason. He has all those athletic gifts as a kind of a pass catching first sort of guy. So I think getting him more involved is it has to happen for this offense to achieve balance. You look at all the great offenses across the NFL, they all have quality tight ends. So,
yeah. And Chris, how did Nix seem after the game at the press conference? They did show him a little frustrated on the broadcast at times on the sidelines, looked a little, I don't want to say beat down, but you could tell that he was expecting more of himself. How did he seem in that presser after the game?
He seemed okay. He was more expansive, perhaps, than normal. I mean, he knows he wasn't going to come out and blatantly say I played terrible, but he knows it. I mean, during the training camp preseason, if there was a tough question or a question that was maybe not a positive question, he was often very short. He wasn't short with his answers yesterday because, I mean, he would have been then short on every question because virtually every question, touched upon that. It was a less than stellar debut. So, yeah, he said it was a tough day. He wasn't, I don't know, fully expansive. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, he did touch upon the raucous crowd, said it didn't affect him that much, but I'm sure it did a lot more than he let on.
All right, we're going to preview Pittsburgh later in the week when we know who's playing quarterback for them. Chris, you mentioned Tomlin's supposed to announce something tomorrow on who's going to play. That game will be interesting either way. But real quick before we go, Kyle, you go first. One adjustment you think you'll see on Sunday from the Broncos?
Oh man, I'll go with the easy answer. I think they run the football more than 30 times. I think they're going to have to just be committed to it, even if it's not going so great, because they need to do that. They need the reps and they need to figure out who's going to be the guy, right? I think if we only look at week 1 as a sample size, it's not quite big enough to figure out how that rotation is going to work. But after one game, at least Sean Payton has an idea of what is working and what's not behind this high-priced offensive line, right? I think through all this discussion we really haven't brought up that group. If the running game's going to improve, it's got to start up front.
All right, so Chris, Kyle took the easy answer. What's one adjustment you could see?
Yeah, well, I'm going to follow up on the running game. I think you have a shorter leash with Javonte Williams. I mean, last year, the second half of the season, virtually every game was less than 3 yards per carry, and they were hoping for better things this year. And sure enough, opener 2.9 yards per carry, 8 carries, 23 yards, and that take away the 9-yard run to start the game, and that's 7 for 14 yards. So I think they need to have a shorter leash with him. I think maybe they need to get, I know he was kind of a doghouse yesterday. They need to maybe get Estime a longer look, concoct some more things for Jaleel McLaughlin. Still might be too early for Blake Watson, but who knows? Let's look at him in practice, and maybe he's a surprise activation on Sunday. But I think you have to have a shorter leash with Javonte Williams because it was just the same old as we saw last season.
He's never been. I don't know if he's ever going to be the same after that injury. He just seems like he hasn't been. That was a pretty big injury, so it makes sense. All right, guys, thanks for coming on and talking. We're going to do these every Monday to react to the game and then get back together usually Fridays to preview the next week's game. So you get to listen to us twice. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. You can also go there and hear myself and Tyler King rant and rave about the Buffs. That was we had some pretty hot takes on that. You can check that out on this feed as well. So Chris and Kyle, thanks for coming on, and we will catch up on Friday.
Thank you.